in an outreach and recruiting capacity. So thank you so much for responding to our invitation to come and join us for a lunch and learn today. As most of you have probably seen, there are cameras in the back of the room. That is because this is being taped as part of a webinar series that we hope to air this fall or winter as a bit of outreach with our alums and prospective students. So just so you know, you are being filmed. Thirdly, this is all done in an effort to promote our leadership programs. So here at Gonzaga, we have some pretty great leadership programs. Most of you have probably heard of the communication leadership, organizational leadership, and our newest addition, leadership and theology. So if you're interested in hearing more about those, we have some admissions counselors out in the foyer, and they can talk to you about those programs after the presentation from Dr. Albert. So obviously you guys are here to not hear from me, but to hear from Dr. Albert. So I'm going to turn it over to the man who touches hearts of people everywhere he speaks. He's been with us since 1993 here at Gonzaga, and he is a man of great influence, the acting dean of the School of Professional Studies, Mr. Joe.
I have this terrible habit of forgetting to go to the bathroom right before I give a talk, and but you can imagine the implications of which I've done. It's very embarrassing. It's most embarrassing when you come back in the room, you know. So, anyway. Hey, thanks for coming. Lunches look good, so that'll be cool. Stories. We listen to them, we tell them, we read them, we watch them. They're part of our lives. And what I'm going to propose today is that stories also are who we are. And I'm going to let you sort of wrestle with that a little bit as I move through. And but just think about that stories, in a sense, are our identity. About a week ago, I was down in Southern California with my wife visiting her mother, and 97 years old, and lives by herself. Her husband, Vince, died 2 years ago now, after being married for 76 years. And she's mostly blind, and so doesn't watch TV. And they don't have Wi-Fi, and we can only watch the Weather Channel for so long, you know, before I go stir crazy, and because it's just painful. So, and my wife was down there a week ahead of me, and so by the time I got there, she just wanted somebody to talk to, you know, and so I would give her a little bit of a break and sit down with Fern is her name, and ask her to just, you know, on her own, she would volunteer these stories. And she told 2 stories that she had never told before, at least to me. One was probably about 10, 15 years ago, her and Vince, her husband, were in the RV, as you might guess, driving around the country, and they were in the Northeast somewheres, up around Massachusetts. And the RV was pulled off to the side, and Vince was working on the engine, and Fern went over. She said there was a little pond nearby, and I went over and just sort of walked down to the edge just to get a little breath of fresh air. And she said there was a duck there with its little ducklings, and I have no idea. It shows how much I know about wild animals. But she said the mother duck would just take each duckling one at a time and let it swim, nudge it out, and it would swim and come back, and do that with each of them. And she said it was the most fascinating thing. She said, you know, there's no parenting books for mother ducks, but they knew exactly how to nurture and nudge and protect the little ducklings. And then she told me another story, and her and her husband had run a laundromat in LA for a number of years, and I said, what was that like? Because it was late nights and kind of tough areas of East LA and where they had the laundromats. And she goes, well, you know, it was good for me. I was just home with the kids, and I got to do something. And in addition to helping the kids with their own kids and so forth. And she said, but one night, she goes, I'll never forget this. This guy came in, and she goes, we offered free drying. And so we made the money on the washers. But this guy would sneak in with wet clothes and just want to dry them for free, you know. And she goes, so I went over to him, and I said, you can't do that here. And I grabbed his clothes, and I threw them into the basket. And he said, oh, yeah. And he grabbed them and threw them back into the dryer. And I said, whoa, this is like escalating. And her husband wasn't there at the laundromat at the time. He was home. And I said, what'd you do? She goes, I just stood up to him. I said, nope, sorry, buddy, you're out of here. And I stood there and he started throwing trash cans around the laundromat and kicking stuff over. But you know what? He left and I never budged. 2 stories. For her, there's just simply stories. But as I heard those 2 stories, I think what I got was a sense of her at the core. 2 things that probably she's most proud of in her life, right? One is a mother to her 3 daughters, and the other is this sense of strength. You know, South Dakota farm person, moves to LA in the 30s, you know, the whole story there, and but tough and strong at the same time. It just was very kind of inspiring to me. And I just listened, as all of you would do probably too. And so often I hear people that sit with older folks and they tell these stories and they appear to be meaningless or pointless. But if you listen for the story at the heart of it. And that's what I got, was this woman that proud of being a parent, but also proud of who she is and what she's done in her life. Very inspirational for me. So our stories are who we are. It's how we think about ourselves. I don't even know if she told her daughters those stories, you know, but she told me. And so I felt very fortunate to be there and hear them. Think about your own stories today as I sort of, and some of you have heard me talk many times, and I apologize for that, but in advance, actually. So, but there's a couple points I want to make, and every one of you in this room has a story. Every one of you has narratives from your life that maybe you haven't formulated into a story, but in a sense, it's how you view yourselves. Those of you that are familiar with attachment theory, those first couple years of life that an infant experiences, what happens during those years is a narrative begins to develop. A wiring occurs about the infant's place in the world, their ability to navigate, how safe or hostile the world might be. How capable are they? Do they need help? Can they do things on their own and explore safely? All those pieces start to come together in those first couple years of life. And that's our narrative we begin to grow up with and develop into. Most of us don't remember those first 2 years very well. It's always fun to work with high school kids, and I'm like, tell me a story about, early in my life, like last year, you know? It's kind of like that. But with the rest of us, there's a lot of stories to pull from. But what happens, I think, as we begin to pull the significant stories out and put them out there, is a narrative identity begins to emerge. Who we are, how we view ourselves in the world. And that certainly happened to me. I grew up, as many of you know, back east, where I'll be next week. Like I like to call God's country, but in fact, it's the Jersey Shore. And went to an elementary school, St. Aloysius Elementary School in Oakland, New Jersey, actually. And I could not sleep last night. I had the hardest time. I was just nervous and anxious about this and how to do it in a way that would sort of keep people interested and entertained. At the same time, you know, make it useful as we film this thing. And so I went through an old scrapbook, you know, and I dragged out my first grade picture, my class picture, and Sister Teresa Marie in the back. You can guess which one she is, I think. This is me, and yeah, isn't that funny? And the poor kids, we had to wear ties and coats in first grade. Never forget that. What's a tie? You know, it's kind of one of those experiences and stuff. We were singing in church for a service we were going to perform at, I think, as a class, you know. And I remember Sister coming over to me, and as you can tell, I'm short, and last name's Albert, so I'm always in the front row. And Sister comes over to me, and, you know, Joseph, you know, it helps if you don't sing out loud because it, you know, ruins the sound of the singing, you know. Now, here's the thing. My narrative, right, was about compliance. It was about, I grew up I think, with a mother who worried about me. And that translated to me as you're not capable of surviving without me, you know, so there's an insecurity that comes with that. And so I never pushed back on authority. I never sort of fought and said, I've got a song to sing, you know. That wasn't me. And so absolutely, Sister, yes, I'll just mouth the words. And so that's what I did. And And that was a significant thing, and I remember it very distinctly. I can still remember the feel of the pew, the church pew, and all that where we were standing. And that thread, which is really what stories are, they're a thread we follow day to day in our lives, continued all through grade school for me. Low grades. I was going through my report card last night, and I'm thinking, wow. And it was very interesting to me that almost every report card I saw, the box got checked where it says does not live up to ability. Every one. The other thing that struck me too, Louise will appreciate this and some of the other people, the lowest grades I got were usually in music, Like, who likes music more than me? I don't know, but I couldn't sing, so they just gave me a low grade, I guess, So the thread, the narrative identity I had was that I wasn't able to sort of navigate the world very well. So I was always shy. So people label you shy. And also not too sharp, because I didn't like to speak up in class, so I never raised my hand or anything, because I didn't feel capable enough of doing that. 7th grade comes, of course, same group of kids, and we got the opportunity to try out for altar boy in safety patrol, which I didn't get picked for either, because I was so shy and quiet. This kid, I've never been able to do this before, this is so cool, Jimmy Reardon. He got caught stealing, and he got kicked out, and it opened up these spots for me. So thanks to Jimmy, I've always wanted to thank him for that. Yeah, I got put on safety patrol and an altar boy, so it was pretty great. High school comes, and we had to take entrance exams, of course, and 8th grade, and where are we going to go to high school and stuff. And so the boys, we got a couple of schools to apply for. Craig Bailey, Mike Balk. I was looking at the pictures again last night. God, they were the smart kids in the class, And they all got sort of picked to go to both high schools. And I was like the 3rd or 4th kid to get picked to go to both high schools. And the whole class erupted, And Albert, no way, this can't be right. Sister Bernard, our teacher, announced it publicly. And that's what happened for me. And I'd forgotten a lot of these names till last night, pacing around the house, trying to think of the details of this story. A month later, August 1973, I met with a woman, Marty, and I cannot remember Marty's last name. She was a Quaker, guidance counselor, career counselor at St. Joe's. And I just wanted to meet her. I said, boy, I feel like I need to get involved and do more, maybe volunteer or something. I don't know. I was still working at the warehouse and all that kind of stuff. She goes, well, here's the name of a guy that maybe you could meet and talk to. Maybe he'd have some ideas for you. So a few weeks later, I met with a guy named Bob Bird. I'll never forget him. And he worked with a group called the American Friends Service Committee, which is a Quaker group, and they're international, but they were working in Northeast Philly. Doing conflict resolution with low-income teenagers. And he goes, I could use some help up there. I'm like, okay. Scared to death what that might mean, And off I went and started running a little group with 8th graders. And they were kids dropping out of school, pregnancy, gangs, all that kind of stuff. It was just like wow, this is cool to be able to do this, And the kids would look forward to me coming up. Bob gave me another name. He said, I'd like you to also meet this Jesuit. And I didn't really know any Jesuits. I'd not had any Jesuit instructors up to that point. I didn't know what Jesuit was. I thought it was Jesuits, actually, is how you pronounce it. And so I said, he goes, well, this guy's name's Ed Brady. And I said, okay. And so I met this Jesuit, tall, 6'2", probably in his early 50s at the time, from New Orleans. He had this very big drawl. So we sat down in his office, almost like a closet. They didn't give him much space there. But he said, so tell me about yourself. And I was like, well, there's really not much to say. It all sort of happened this summer, honestly. The light switch went off. Otherwise, I just go to bars and try to meet girls like that. That's kind of the extent of my life, really. But I'm doing this volunteer thing up in Kensington, Fishtown, up in Northeast Philly. And well, let's see what we can do. And he started reaching into his Rolodex and giving me names of people to call. And this one woman, Diane Miller, who worked with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, ran a feeding hunger program there for the Archdiocese, said, call Diane, she'll help you out. I went, okay. Call Diane. Within a month, I'm probably 4 days a week driving their food bank van all over the city, which is interesting in Philly. It was great. And Diane then introduced me to other people. Without knowing it, this narrative really was undergoing pretty significant transformation. And through it all, and Ed Brady really kept an eye on me. He was like my first real mentor. And we had a group called the Brady Bunch, and it was about 7 or 8 of us that would really like just be his acolytes, follow him around. And it was just really a great experience. Ed had spent 20 years in Sri Lanka doing work, and then Africa, and then came to St. Joe's. And in fact, he had just died 2 years ago, working with refugees and AIDS people in Africa, which would be typical Ed. That would, but Ed like had an amazing circle of people, and probably in the fall of '74, one of his friends came to visit, and you'll never forget the lunch meeting. It was this great meeting. He goes, "Joe, would you like to meet Mother?" I'm like the mother? Like that. It was the funniest thing, So I said, sure, why not? Can I bring my mom? Mother's meeting, this will be great, And it's just a funny thing to meet an iconic figure like that and spend time with her. And a lot of Ed's friends and the people I was actually working with had spent a lot of time in Calcutta with her. And so she was like a friend of the group sort of thing, And so to sit down and spend like an hour with her and just talk, about her experiences and her work and all that kind of thing. It was quite profound, Spring of '75, I applied to a thing called Jesuit Volunteers and came out here. And the narrative at that point had been exploded, and I was courageous. I was willing to risk. I was open. I'll never forget leaving home, playing Billy Joel's Traveling Prayer on the tape player, and driving out of Jersey and thinking, this will never be the same. And it never was. Here I am all these years later, right? So yeah, July '75, I drove out here and went home and took care of my dad for a couple years later when he was dying, and that was rich. But I've been here ever since. And but all the time that narrative was sort of evolving and unfolding, but I never told it to anybody. I'd never described it as a narrative. 1978, I got hired at Gonzaga Prep High School to run retreats, and I think in the 6 years I was there, I think I did over 200. And it's one of those things you're doing if you ever want a hellish experience. Run a retreat with about 40 sophomore students who don't want to be there. You're driving the bus. Teachers in the back of the bus grading papers, and you got them all day. Like, what are you going to do? What could possibly be interesting to these kids? And I didn't know. And I'm driving the bus up to the retreat center, and I had nothing planned. I knew we had lunch at noon, a liturgy at 1:15. That was all I knew. And so I have like 3 hours. Okay, you can do this. Come up with something. Games. We'll do games. That's it. And so we get in this room, and I'll never forget this. Monteclair, St. Joseph's out in Colbert, and sit down in a circle, and they're all looking at me, looking in their faces. I don't want to be here, but there's guys or there's girls, and okay, this will work, So for lack of anything else, I told my story, and up to that point anyway, and I'll never forget they listened, not because they were polite, because they were engaged. And this guy, this retreat director, was being authentic and real with us. And then I asked them to do the same with each other, and they sort of did it. And that was the first time I ever told the story. And what I learned from that, I think, and I think one other thing that was significant for me, Jane Hession's here. Jane got me involved with a thing called Washington Business Week. How many years ago was that? Yeah. And a couple of years after doing it, I give a similar talk, a little different, and really sort of dig in the high school, because it's a couple hundred high school kids maybe, and junior, senior, sophomore, junior, seniors. And it was over in Cataldo, and I talked, and the kids are very nice kids, very talented, bright kids. And after the talk's over, I'm sitting in the back with one of the organizers. He and I are standing there, and the kids all come by, hey, it was great, man, thanks, yeah. It's like one of those, I'm like, yeah, buy a book, buy an autograph, What do you say, But there's this little girl waiting, and she's like a sophomore, very shy kid, and she's standing right there. I'll never forget her. And she just waits, and everybody's leaving, and suddenly it's just her and I and this guy, Tim. And I said, can I help you? And she goes, do you have a second? And I said, sure. And she goes, well, I just want to say something. I said, what? And she goes, well, you just saved my life. And I'm like, okay, can you explain? She goes, well, I've been suicidal for probably 2 years now, I'm severely depressed. She goes, this is the first day I've ever felt hope. And she said, thanks, and walked out. And this guy grabs me, goes, well, that makes your day. I'm like, no crap, you know. I couldn't believe it. I just never forgot it, you know what I mean? It was just this powerful moment because my story connected with hers. And that's my point, that what's most personal is also most universal. In class, Jill and others that have had my class know this, that you tell a very risky story about yourself. You put it out there, and it connects and it resonates because it gives voice and it gives meaning and manifests, I think, what's real for others as well. And that's what's so cool when I get to teach storytelling or do work like this, is people get to hear each other's stories and find connections. And wow, I felt the same way, you know, it's that kind of a thing. So my point is honestly, first be aware of your own story. I think leadership without a sense of your own story is dangerous. That's your foundation. That's where you stand. That's who you are. That's what it means to be authentic, is to know your own story. Leaders also have to, I think, be good listeners. Each year I do some training with hospice volunteers that are really helping people tell their story towards the end of their lives. And it's quite powerful. And that's a gift you give to someone. Telling them your story is certainly, you know, rich and it's a great experience for you. But helping someone else tell their story, unbelievably powerful. And being a listener, like I described with my wife's mother at the beginning. Just being an audience, being a listener, actively listening to her story. There was a sense, when we say goodbye to her, I think she has a real sense of sadness that Deb's leaving, and you know, I'm leaving, probably less so, but you know, I'm leaving too. But I think what she liked was that we got to sort of be with her as she tells these stories, and she felt heard. There's a woman that's on our advisory board, works at Starbucks, and a few years ago, she had the opportunity to meet with Oprah Winfrey, and she asked Oprah, she goes, you know, of all the interviews you've done, what is it that you've, you know, taken away from all these interviews? And she said, every person, no matter how famous, no matter who they are, every person wants to be seen. Every person wants to be seen. And that's the story. Every person wants to have their story heard, I think. They want to be, they want somebody that's going to be present to it and hear it. Some of my students, I'm very proud to say, I started an initiative a couple years ago working with a homeless shelter for women doing storytelling. And I remember going up there, and the women were so flattered that these Gonzaga students would actually listen to their stories. You know, and I went up, and and this is a gift you can give people, is reframing one's story. And this woman said, well, you know, I've got these job interviews coming up, and you know, I've been in jail, I've been involved with drugs, alcohol, bad relationships, you know, prostitution, everything. I said, well, I wouldn't use all that in the interview, honestly. You know. But what I heard from her was, she said, but I feel like I'm a failure. I'm like, a failure? She goes, yeah. And I said, you're living in your car, you're raising 2 kids, they go to school every day. That's a hero, you know. Reframing a story, listen for the heroic dimensions of it. That's a gift back to people. So, and what you try to do, what I try to do, I think when I hear a story, is honor the strength in it, honor the positive sort of qualities in it, and keep punctuating that, right? Because that's the real self, right? That's the true self, the healthy narrative that they're hopefully growing into. So a leader has to be able to tell a story about him or herself, I think, in the sense of, this is who I am. You know, this sort of defines me. Be able to listen and get to know each other's stories. I got to work kind of hard, I think, in my floor. I'll leave and my staff can get up here and talk. But I try to know each person's story as best I can. You know, what matters to them? What's their, you know, what's their family, whatever it might be. Another dimension of this for folks in leadership roles is telling the team story, the group story, the we story. Look for those moments when your team gels. Look for the moments when they achieve, overcome challenges. That's a we story. And I love when a leader can say, this is why I'm proud of this group. This is who we are. This is who we are at our best. I do ride-alongs with the fire department each year, and I've seen them do these heroic things in these homes, you know, save people's lives, and they just go on like it's no big deal. And I'm like, these are incredible stories you guys live and do, you know. It's quite powerful. It really is. And moments when the group gels and when they achieve. Because in the future, when you do face tough times, you're going to look back at those and say, yeah, we did that. And we can do this too. That's where we're going. And that's a great, I think, for a leader to be able to do that, I think is powerful. And then finally, the future stories. The leader's job is to create that future sort of a scenario. This is where we're going. This is what it's going to look like and feel like. Back to Jill's class this summer, I mean, I just remain reading some incredible future stories, like day in the life stories. 5 years from now, this is what it's going to be like coming to work here. That's a great story to tell, you know, and it's just powerfully inspiring, I think, for people. So I think a leader without an ability to understand and navigate this world of storytelling is going to be at a loss. And so if nothing else today, if you have at least some insights, some skills, and some ideas about how you can use this, I think you're just going to be, I think, growingly more effective almost every day. And it's certainly something I stand on and stand behind. And because, again, stories are who we are. We listen, we tell them, we watch them, we read them, and we also are them. And your ability to connect with people at that level, I think, is significant. So with that, I think I am out of time and want you guys to finish your lunch. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening. Okay.